Hey everyone, Cursed Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are with the second part of Montusker's Doctor decks that they sent us, with the 9th Doctor with Clara Oswald, an upkeep tokens deck. This is a really interesting deck that does a lot more than I really thought it would, with the 9th Doctor being the only Doctor I've actually seen episodes of. I haven't even seen that, what is it, the Weeping Angels episode? I know that's a very popular one, but I watched a few of the 9th Doctor episodes with my wife, so I do know this guy. This deck, coming from Montusker, the only part that they sent me that's worth repeating is that they think that both decks, this being one of the two decks, suck at actually playing multiple cards at later turns, but haven't played them since most recent changes, so you can decide that. They also had said earlier that they wanted one of the decks to be a human deck. I misunderstood, I thought the other one, but it's this one that they were suggesting that this could be a humans deck. And I can see if you go into the considering tab, which is considering a lot of cards, there are some commanders here. Where's our Jeskai? Eowyn here, for example, or Aragorn in different colors as like kind of the builds for a human deck. That being said, that would be making the deck from scratch. This is definitely not a human deck. If the deck builder wants me to do that, you should send me an email and we can figure something out for the deck building. But for now, I'm going to take the deck as it is and see what we can do to improve it. And there's actually a lot that's on my mind. So without further ado, let's get right into it. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is the 9th Doctor and why are they our, main commander of our 3-color upkeep tokens deck? Well, this is actually pretty straightforward. The 9th Doctor is a 2/4 in Izzet colors who has haste and the ability into the TARDIS. Whenever this creature becomes untapped during your untap step, you get an additional upkeep step after this step. So this is really interesting because it's both a very wide net, but also super specific. The wide net being what you want to do with that extra upkeep step really depends on what direction you're going in and the 3rd color you add. But the ability going off, which is whenever the Doctor becomes untapped during your untap step, is really specific, right? That means we can't use untap abilities to get extra activations. And for those who don't know, you actually do not get priority during the untap step. So there's nothing you can do like tapping him down and untapping him again, like nothing like that. Basically, if you have tapped this creature, most likely by attacking, on your next turn, you get an extra upkeep. And we are pairing the 9th Doctor with Clara Oswald, which is a very standard, I think, kind of fill-in for any kind of companion that doesn't need to be something super specific. But once again, doubling the triggers is the main kind of bonus beyond that 3rd color. 3rd color being Clara is white. And here it says, if a triggered ability of a Doctor you control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time, which means you will get 2 upkeep steps after, which is nice. That being said, at 6 mana, this doesn't have the same punch as it does in something like the War Doctor, where the War Doctor, Clara, gets another huge trigger out on attack and whenever cards go into exile. So this is a bit of a smaller trigger, but still, I do appreciate Clara is a really good creature and a good companion, and I think she does a lot for the deck. Looking at the deck itself, there's a lot to kind of see and a lot of different directions that we could take a look in, but let's start off with the basics. We're at 39 lands, which I don't mind at all. We're trying to cast some 4 and 5 drops if we go to curve, and 6 drops. So having the extra mana with very little ramp outside of mana rocks is kind of helpful. I would argue we could probably go down 1 land. 39 feels a little high, and I do want to talk about the higher mana cost cards, so perhaps there is room to kind of go to 37 and cut some high mana cards, but at the moment, we can see some of our big drops are 8 mana, so 39 feels fine. Looking at the curve, I'm just going to close this considering list. Looking at the curve, we do notice there's a bit of a stagnation in the latter half. We kind of plateau around 5 mana, which is 6 cards at 5 mana, 6 cards at 6 mana, and 2 cards at 8 mana. And it doesn't really look like these cards outside of, let's see, Inspiring Refrain, and do we have another? And Rousing Refrain. So outside of 2 that are actually 2 and 3 mana, so each of these piles are actually 5 mana. This is kind of a lot. I tend to try to avoid having more than 4 5 mana cards, maybe 3 6 mana cards. Try to, I don't know, you'd have to see my decks to see the last time I did that, without a huge amount of ramp, and we're definitely missing ramp here. So we have a lot of higher drops, and we have very few low drops. So this is the first question that we can answer, which is why aren't we double spelling a lot in the late game? Well, we just don't have that many spells to double spell. Namely, our biggest group is our 3 mana, which is the same as our commander, which I don't really like. And a lot of these 3 mana cards either can't be double spelled, like the counter magic, for example, or removal, or just doesn't really work really well by itself. Plus, to double spell on 3 drops, you need 6 mana, which once again brings us to a bit of a mana problem there. Looking at the deck itself, it seems to be doing something pretty straightforwardly. The original version I had was on one of the other websites. It was Archidect, which I don't really like, but they were arranged into categories of, what the deck builder believed to be win cons or enablers, etc., token producers, etc., etc. So I don't replicate that because I find it to be much more useful to look at a deck like this. I've talked about this before, but learn to read decks this way and then work backwards from that. When you kind of build a deck by its pieces and what, I think it was Command Zone that used to do this, or they probably still do this, where they kind of break down decks into what they do. So X amount of single target removal, X amount of board clears, X amount of draw, X amount of ramp. That is really nice when you are building paint by numbers, but after a certain level of kind of practice, you should really drop the habit, because every deck is going to be a little different. Every deck is going to have different expectations, and every pod is going to have different expectations for, let's say, removal and the like. So you need to be able to kind of look at a glance, figure out what cards do, figure out what a deck does, and then work backwards. All this to say, something that I had noticed in the build that the deck builder sent me was the quote-unquote win conditions tended to be cards that doubled things. So Shadow of the Second Sun, I think Paradox Haze was in there. I'd have to open it up again, but Mechanized Production was in there, which it is a win condition. Thopter Spy Network was in there. And I found that to be a little odd, because generally I tend to look at things that double as enablers or payoffs, right? Generally, they are payoffs in the sense that you have to be already doing the thing in order to get more of the thing. So for example, if you had a token doubler such as a Noetic Procession, which we have, this only does anything if you're generating a lot of tokens. So it is mostly payoff, but it is a bit of an enabler if you want to generate a bajillion tokens, right? Whereas something also as Shadow of the Second Sun, this is, I would say, only a payoff. It is an enabler in the sense that you get a whole other untap step, which works really well with your commander, but this is like a 6 mana, you commit to this thing, and I guess it is an enabler then. Maybe don't pay attention to too many of these words exactly. Okay, so with that aside, the thing that I was trying to get at is that I noticed that we have a lot of our win conditions in 4 or 5 mana. Another one was Mirror Sigil Sergeant, which is really, really cool because if you have a blue permanent, i.e. your commander, you create a token on upkeep of this card, which means if you have your commander and it's triggered, you get 2 4/4s every upkeep, every untap, and more if you have more doublers, which is pretty strong. But it's worth noting, these are 4/4s with trample, which makes this kind of a crashing footballs kind of ability, which is kind of funny. But it is a 6 mana card to throw out the Mirror Sigil Sergeant, which makes it kind of tough, right? And looking at our other high mana cards, Sphinx of the Second Sun, which is obviously the same as Shadow of the Second Sun, giving us more phases, is also very, very mana hungry and a great finisher for the deck because it kind of makes the deck go off, but does nothing in the early game. And that's what I'm going to start talking about cuts now. I feel the deck is really missing its early game plays, because objectively, what really are we doing in the early game? We're playing one of two creatures, we're holding up removal, or just hoping to drop mana rock after mana rock, which I think is actually the thing we want to do, right? We want to drop mana rock after mana rock because that's the most conducive thing to our deck. So I want to put in some cards, and we'll get to additions soon, that increase our ability to start doing the work we want to do as a upkeep token deck earlier in the game, so that by the time Ninth Doctor is out and attacking, we're already building towards our game plan and we're already doing something. Something that's really interesting is the Ninth Doctor doesn't, like in a deck like this, there's no point on playing him turn 3, right? Think about it like this. What benefit is there to curving out to the Ninth Doctor in this current list? And the answer is pretty much only Nyx's Fleece Ram. Nyx's Fleece Ram is the only upkeep trigger here at 2 mana, which is fair because upkeep triggers are hard to find at low mana costs that are like in this kind of build. But this is the only one, and it is by far the worst one. So let's start here. I've been kind of giving general things about it. Let's go through the cards before I get too distracted and see what we can say. So Nyx's Fleece Ram is just a bad card. I'm sorry. This is at best with your commander with the second sun cards gaining you 3 to 4 life a turn. That's at best, and it's basically meaningless. It's only your upkeep. It's a good blocker, but that's it. I do like that it fits in this kind of enchantment sub-theme we're going on, but even then, this is not a good card, and it's an easy cut. Dragon Master Outcast is interesting, but I think I would prefer this in a Temur build where Clara is green. The lack of access to ramp, because this is specifically land ramp, right? Mana rocks don't count to this. The lack of access to ramp is really rough here. So Dragon Master Outcast really doesn't do anything a good percentage of the game. Let's see. Hold on. I have a thought here. We're gonna click 6. We're gonna say you have a 41% chance of playing these on curve. So playing Dragon Master Outcast anytime between the first 6 turns, right? And technically, let's say 5 turns for it, still only gives you a 50% chance to play those 6 lands in a row to trigger this. That's not great, and in the meantime, the Outcast is just a 1/1 shaman. I really don't like this here. This is one of those cards that felt really, really good and was really, really cool when Zendikar first came out, but now has been kind of outclassed in like so many ways. The fact that by itself, like in a deck like this without land ramp, you're just fairly playing this, I think is a bad idea, and I think a lot of the time you're going to wish this be literally anything else. Hannah is pretty interesting here. I do like the enchantment return here, and I like as the one recursion piece, so I don't think it's too bad. But I will note that she is kind of tricky and a pretty big mana sink to make work. So if we look at the majority of our enchantments, they're 3 mana and higher, which means to use Hannah and then to play it is 6 mana and higher, which kind of sucks. We don't really have a lot of enchantments that purposely go into the graveyard, and so generally Hannah only does anything when we are behind because our opponents are destroying our permanents. Likewise, on the artifact side of it, same thing. And speaking of graveyard, Anger also sticks out here as being particularly bad because we have no real means of putting Anger into the graveyard ourselves. So almost all of the time, we are just slamming Anger down as a creature and hoping to block, hoping someone blocks us. It's not really, really great, and because of that, I don't think it's going to do much. Going to something like Mirel. I can't be too mad at Mirel because she's very, very strong, but her token setup really doesn't work as well as like the rest of the deck. Like generally this is a soldier card, so it's kind of cool that she attacks, creates 1 soldier, next attack she creates 2 soldiers. So you're like doubling the number of soldiers every attack, but you don't really have a lot of other meaningful ways to create soldiers. I know Assemble the Legions here, but like, I mean, you're not playing Assemble the Legion because of morale. You're playing Assemble the Legion because Assemble the Legion and your commander is nuts. You're creating such a huge army so quickly. So though I will say, yes, obviously the combo is here, individually, each of them don't do that much. I guess this captain also makes soldiers. Still, like I said, I can't be mad. This silence effect is incredibly powerful, and I think she's a very, very good addition to the deck. Windborn Muse feels a little strange here. Likewise, like Sphere of Safety, I think I like a little more because it kind of has a synergy with the deck, with all the enchantments and Ghostly Prison and Propaganda, sure. But like, why are these cards here? This is the thing I'm having kind of a hard time. Like, I do get in the current build, the only thing you can do is hold up interaction, get to turn 3, start slamming Propaganda, Ghostly Prison effects to defend yourself, play one of your 4 or 5 mana upkeep creature token generators, then play 9th Doctor. And that's a pretty good strategy, I will say. Sorry, just got to do that. But here's the thing. Are you that afraid of getting attacked? You're a token deck. When it comes to chumping, nobody's got you beat. You should have blocks for days. And then even beyond that, the next question is, these Sphere of Safety and Ghostly Prison Propaganda effects actually do not help our game plan at all, right? Because the 9th Doctor needs to be able to attack and needs to be able to get through, unless we're like tapping him down for Springleaf Drum. And if we're not, like, these prison effects, 1, they don't help him get through, and 2, if our opponent's creatures can't attack profitably, they might not attack. If they want to attack you, they might just hold up those creatures for defense to block the Doctor. So it just feels like a pretty big nombo with the deck. That being said, I do not mind the 3 mana versions, and I do not mind Sphere of Safety, so they're not the worst, but the Windborn Muse definitely feels not good enough. Victory's Envoy is a 5 mana card that only does something when you're ahead, and don't get me wrong, putting 2+1/+1 counters on your board is good, but when your board is only Victory's Envoy, it's not that great. I think I just prefer many other, like something else, maybe something that triggers on creatures entering, because with that in mind, like at least you'd have a more active kind of stake in this, whereas Victory's Envoy here, you know, with your commander out, don't get that. That's like a 4/6, then a 6/8, which is pretty nice, but it's huge investment. At that point, I'd rather just be putting equipment on the 9th Doctor, making him unblockable, growing him that way, something like that, right? Instead of like investing in this 5 mana card that doesn't do anything for a turn cycle. Astral Dragon is a very good card here because it works by copying our other, you know, triggering spells. So I do like this as a finisher. So these 2 finishers, Astral Dragon and Sphinx of the Second Sun, I really do like. I will suggest some more. Farewell feels particularly bad here because at least one of the modes is incredibly detrimental to you. And probably this mode as well because you rely on mana rocks. So most of the time this is just going to be a board clear, and if that's going to be the case, this should just be a 4 mana board clear, right? You don't need to go into 6 mana at this point. Farewell has this reputation of being so powerful in Commander, and it's honestly just kind of okay. It relies on a lot of like gameplay mechanics working. So for example, in lower power where all of your opponents are just sitting around amassing a huge amount of permanence, right? In those kind of situations, Farewell is really good, which is why Farewell is better against this deck than in the deck. But if you get any further, like into power level, you're going to be dealing with decks that that are running mainly off of the stack or using other haste-based or activated ability style win conditions that don't require them to overcommit to the board as much. Or you're going up against the biggest enemy of Farewell decks, ramp decks, right? There are some elements in lower power pods where ramp is just like an uncontested, insane strategy, where, you know, it is just seen as a faux pas to interact with single target or mass land destruction. It's seen as like a bad thing to kind of mess with the player who's just ramping. But then when players play spells like Farewell and wipe the entire board, the player that's stuck with 12 lands, yeah, you know, everyone's top decking, but the player with 12 lands top decking is going to do a lot better than the others. So Farewell is the kind of card that leads into situations that low tables suffer from. And this is the kind of deck, as mentioned before, that Farewell eats up and spits out. So I think I'd really rather out of it. Just play a board clear. You're in the color of Supreme Verdict. You can just play that, and I think you'd be pretty happy. In our instance, we have that little mix at the start where we have some of the most powerful instants and sorceries right here at the top. And then we're playing Cancel and Disallow for some reason. Not quite sure what's going there. Cancel should at least be Counterspell, right? Like, there's no reason to be paying one more for this ability. At least Disallow is a little more specific, but I'm not quite sure what happened there. I will also note this is just one of those things where, you know, our instance section is just so profoundly powerful in comparison to the rest of the deck to kind of support the deck. And as I've said many times before, this kind of leads me to think that there is a problem with kind of settling on the deck's power level, because usually this happens when you have a strategy that isn't extremely powerful, and so you want to prop it up with some extremely powerful cards or very efficient cards, which means either you are having a hard time making the deck the power level you want it to, or you're just at a table where this deck just can't compete. And I would just very much so encourage you to kind of keep that in mind with the cards you build. I said recently, and I'll say again, I have no problem with cards like Swords of Plowshares, Path of Exile, Lightning Bolt should be here, Arcane Denial is a great one, of these really low mana efficient removal or interaction spells being in almost every deck. That's fine. But when we include things like Enlightened Tutor, Swan Song, Dovin's Veto, it's telling me something about the kind of playgroup you're expecting, and that playgroup, when you need to counter spells this badly that you're playing Swan Song, and you need to get your right enchantments that you're playing in Lightning Tutor, that tells me that you're probably going up against decks that are much, much stronger. And these cards are probably not the ones that's going to improve this deck's chance of winning. Further than that, I will note that Return the Favor feels particularly bad here. Don't get me wrong, I see how the triggered ability being copied can be very, very effective, especially on things like Shadow of the Second Sun. But I still think there's better things we can do. That's an investment. That's a very, very win more card, so I'm not a big fan. Chaos Warp also, I think, is generally outclassed by Generous Gift, and if you want the second Generous Gift, you should play Stroke of Midnight before you play Chaos Warp, because outside of the exile nature of Chaos Warp, I will say, like, the ability to give them a 1/1 over whatever else might be in their deck is probably a safer bet. Artifacts are fine. Venser's Journal, feels incredibly win more. This is like you got excited for Nyx Fleece Ram and you wanted more, and this is not really the more you want. In, I think, 99% of conditions, if you were against me with this deck and you slam Venser's Journal, I don't think I would bat an eyelid at you, because the life gain is not what I'm fighting through. I'm most likely fighting through the army of tokens, the sphere of safety, and the other kind of propaganda effects. That's what's in my way. The difference between you having 30 life and 90 life, it's not that meaningful to me, right? Most decks by late game, especially when you get to the 1v1 portion of the game, are probably swinging in with huge numbers, either on really tall creatures or just a wide variety of a team. And so, like, taking you down an extra 60 life, it doesn't mean anything. As soon as I can get through your defenses, I'm going to be chunking away at your health really, really fast. So I don't think Venser's Journal is going to make a big difference. And I guess replicating Ring is at least cute here, so I think that's fine. All right, looking at our enchantments, I like almost all of these. Quicksilver Dagger I think is the cutest. I really do enjoy it. Perhaps there should be more ways to untap your commander. I didn't put any in, but I think it's worth considering. And the rest of these I generally like. Mind Unbound. Mind Unbound feels like a bit of a liability. I think you'd be happier just having a lower mana draw card. Just something that's like 3 mana draw 2, 4 mana draw 3, right? 6 mana to eventually draw is a bit of a problem. And I do see that like the mana, the card draw aspect of the deck isn't really, really great. So having a few of those cards could be good. But let's go into additions, because the main things I want to talk about is things that will enable your deck to win, because we're not like, as much as I can say, hey, you need some more card draw, I think we're at the point that we need some better or more consistent pressure and finishers. This isn't one of them, but I really think it's worth mentioning that Paradise Mantle just works really, really well with your commander, and that you should be playing it, much like Springleaf Drum. All right, let's move forward. So I know this is in the cards that you are thinking about, and I think this is a great place to start. I want as many of these create a creature on upkeep abilities, and I want them as cheap as possible. So Outlaw's Merriment is probably not the cheapest one, and it is kind of weird because you do get one at random, but they always have haste, and they're always somewhat relevant. Especially if you grow them with the trample. The lifelink, I think, will be much more meaningful than any Venser's Journal like life gain, just because you're encouraged to attack and block with them. And the Maid Miriam one, with throws a dagger, also very, very strong, because especially if you can roll it twice on upkeep, you're going to be very, very happy to get extra few triggers and kill off some small creatures, or deal direct damage. So I think this one's really good. The next one is Goblin Assault. This one's a little more restrictive because we've got a forced attack, but generating goblins every single turn. They have haste. You're generally going to be able to pick the opponent who has the least amount of blockers to try to keep as many goblins as you can, but you're going to start popping out bodies early that will support your token game plan later, right? Cards that you have that will care about the number of permanents you have will be very, very much so happier. Things like Intangible Virtue will pay off much faster when you have more creatures in play. And so starting off early is going to be a big difference. Even earlier than that is Skrill's Hive, which is one that's kind of probably the trickiest to figure out. If you were in black, this would be Bitter Blossom, and I think the Bitter Blossom would be a little better. But Skrill's Hive will still generate extra bodies. I think Divine... Is it still here? Yeah, Divine Visitation works really well with both the goblins and the Skrill's Hive, because generally, as much as the like mites are cool with Toxic 1, you're generally going to be much happier with the angels. But in the meantime, as you build towards them, just having a steady stream of mites that force your opponent to think about keeping up blockers is going to make a big difference. Especially when your commander's out and you're putting 2 of these out a turn, there are going to be boards where you just realize you can chip in for like 4 to 5 poison counters, and then just do it again a few turns later to knock a player out. So I do really like that, and I think you're going to benefit from it a lot. One more that I thought was really, really interesting is the Shrine of Loyal Legions, because this kind of works both ways on... this should work with all of the shrines, but this is the one that catches my eye the most. So what makes this really good is both halves of this card work well with your strategy. The first half being that this triggers on upkeep, which means every upkeep you'll get 2 charge counters when your commander is out and working instead of 1, but also because this generates just a bunch of bodies. So late game, if you can play some white cards to speed it up, but after a few turns with your commander out, or even before your commander's out, just dropping the shrine and getting ready, hopefully getting out Divine Visitation or the Impact Tremors enchantment that you have, and then cracking this and putting like 6 creatures into play is going to make a really big difference, and I think it's going to be very worthwhile. So this one really caught my eye as a particularly strong card. You could also play the other shrines. I don't see why you couldn't. I don't know if we'll be able to find them. If I say Shrine of, we're probably gonna... Oh, we can! Wow, that was really, really great. Okay, Looking, obviously you can play any of these because they don't have the mana cost, but or the mana symbol. But it's clear that some are better than others. Loyal Legions works here. The black one is too much of a mana investment. The red one, I think, is probably the next strongest one because it's like a slow burn spell either to a creature or a player. And the green one is just mana, which is fine. And the blue one is... right, it's kind of like a dig through time, sort of. So I would just really play the Shrine of Loyal Legions, but if you wanted, you could play the Burning Rage as well. Moving on, I spoke of Impact Tremors. I would like actual factual Impact Tremors in this deck. It's been reprinted enough that it's pretty cheap now, and it is a powerful, powerful card. You play this and immediately start reaping value as you cast other creatures as you get ahead. So I think this is going to be a very big benefit to you. Likewise, Perforos, which is a little more expensive, is another version of this card. This also stands in for the Dragon Terror of something Peaks, right? Terror of the Peaks. Yeah, it is just Terror of the Peaks. No specific peaks, just peaks that it terrorizes. Both of these will work really, really well. Obviously, Terror of the Peaks does a little more damage, but Perforos is much better as it is an enchantment and harder to interact with and is indestructible. Also works with your kind of enchantment theme a little more, and I do prefer that. But honestly, if you have the budget, I would play both. Playing this and then just going along with your day, generating tokens here and there will just make a very, very big difference and deal a lot of damage. Oh, I forgot to mention, Perforos hits all opponents, and I'm pretty sure that, yeah, this is target, so not as good. Even though it hits 5 at a time, it is a target. Honestly, once again, you could play both, but it is something worth considering. Coming to the end, just a few cards to think about. Generous Plunderer is another upkeep creation card that I thought was really, really cool. This one, it generates a treasure token for you and one for an opponent, and then this card punishes your opponents for having a lot of artifacts. But notably, this can be a really good political tool as you will be giving out 2 treasures a turn cycle. They don't have to go to the same opponent because you just get a second upkeep to give it to someone else. But you can also just pile treasure tokens onto one opponent and then attack them. I mean, they can sack them in response. Not the tapped one. Maybe don't do that. I guess this allows you to do 2 extra damage in addition to their artifacts if you pile them onto one player, because otherwise that player, if feeling threatened, will just sacrifice all their treasure, which may be the best bet anyways. I don't know. Still, this caught my eye as being a pretty decent creature, a mana production for yourself, and works really well with your upkeep triggers, especially because as you'll note, yours do not come in tapped, which means a lot of these like second sun abilities get better and better because you're generating 3 to 4 different treasures a turn. Finally, the last card I wanted to suggest was Rite of the Raging Storm. This is a card I love suggesting, and therefore I will suggest again. This one does particularly well in this deck. It is both, imagine this being half a Ghostly Prison and half of an upkeep token generator, right? On your opponent's turns, you are giving a creature that has to attack. Well, it doesn't have to attack, but most likely will go at your other opponents, causing some turmoil, causing some chaos, and forcing them to kind of deal with each other more than to deal with you. And on your turn, you get 2 of these creatures, if not more, to immediately come in and attack. And I think that's really, really strong. So this is one that I think is a really good addition. And once again, with the enchantment theme, you can go further with that. And that's generally my suggestions. I do think there's a lot more in enchantments you can go into. White definitely has a lot more enchantment support, especially with some of the additions I made. You can go almost fully into enchantments as your upkeep generator, and then you get to play like other enchantment tutors outside of Enlightened Tutor. You get to play cards that like pull enchantments out of your graveyard and the like, and I think you'd be pretty happy there. Even things like Hannah Ship's Navigator gets better the more enchantments we play, so I do see this going further into that direction to be effective. But beyond that, if you want to go in a different direction, especially if you want to go into the humans direction, this would be a completely different deck, but could be still fun. Ninth Doctor humans themselves would be really interesting, but you were looking at other commanders, so I think that's just a different deck. That being said, thank you so much, Montusker, for sending me the deck. It's been really fun to look at these Doctor decks, and I do like how many different variations there are, especially with ones like the Ninth Doctor, who aren't seeing a lot of play from what I've seen, so it is cool to see other things. But in the meantime, thank you so much for sending the deck. Good luck and happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you and good luck in brewing and building.